Making history relevant. History is filled with people, and people are dumb, and usually repeat the same mistakes they made centuries earlier. Hence why Hitler invaded Russia and lost just like Napoleon did. When you read history, if you are smart enough, you can learn from it. America is on its last legs. By the end of this century, it will no longer be the world's sole superpower. That being said, I thought it might be interesting to look and see at how other empires in history have fallen. How the Roman Republic fell. When the Gracchus brothers tried to end the existence of monopolies in Rome, they were assassinated, one being beaten to death by the senators of Rome. And so, what inevitably happened, because monopolies were allowed, powerful men came to dominate, like Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. This eventually became an oligarchy and then a dictatorship. The United States faces a similar predicament. Back at the turn of the century, people like Rockefeller were the most powerful people in America. So the president broke up his company and reduced his power. This saved America for some time, but we have created triumvirates among the oligopolies that exist. They can and do use their money to influence American elections. America is therefore an oligarchy because it allows oligopolies. Only by democratizing the workplace can America become truly democratic. Why did the Roman Empire fall? After Rome became a dictatorship, there were inevitably a few crazy emperors, and so the Praetorian Guard stepped in and assassinated these insane leaders. As a result, it became apparent whoever had the loyalty of the military would be ruler of Rome. And so, just like during the first triumvirate, there was a series of powerful men, as well as subsequent civil wars. It was this infighting among these powerful men why the Roman Empire fell. Along with the subsequent barbarian invasions, they were, as a result, unable to resist. Why the Islamic empires were so successful. In just 100 years, Islam spread from the interior of Arabia to cover all the lands, from Spain to the borders of China. There are a couple of explanations for this. First off, the use of the camel made logistics much easier. An army marches on its stomach, and a camel can go much longer without water than a horse, enabling Arabs to cover vast distances compared to other armies. Secondly, the empire that had been dominating, Byzantium and the Sassanids, were exhausted from fighting each other. As for why it lasted so long, there are a couple of reasons. There was the emphasis on trade in the Muslim religion that allowed Muslims to exploit the Silk Road to the fullest. Muhammad was himself a merchant. The glorification of merchants and the use of the camel to transport goods between China and Europe made Muslim empires enormously wealthy. The obligatory trek from the Hajj meant that information passed quickly from the Middle East to North Africa and vice versa. People were constantly meeting in the center of the empire. Mansa Musa was one of the wealthiest, if not the wealthiest people of all time. And he devalued gold for 10 years in Egypt as a result of his expedition, and brought back knowledge of the Egyptians and was able to establish a vast library in his kingdom of Mali. Other religions were tolerated, although they were made to pay a tax, while, for example, in Europe, you might be safe, or like the Jews murdered by crusaders, jealous Englishmen during the reign of King John, or expelled from Spain during the reign of Isabella. Finally, the obligatory giving of alms meant that attention was given to the poor, so they didn't rise in rebellion. Why did the Ottoman Empire fall? The Ottomans had an army that outmatched anything in Europe when it conquered Constantinople and much of the Balkans. However, it failed to adapt with the changing times. While Europe underwent democratic revolutions, the Ottomans remained mired in the medieval ages. The failure to modernize was its undoing. Likewise, in our current age, the US will eventually lose its supremacy in the world because it has gotten complacent. When you are at the top, there doesn't seem to be much reason to keep evolving. Not only that, but the people in control of society, in order to make society more powerful, has to make it more democratic, since democracy brings cohesion and solidarity. But to do that, you must relinquish power, which their greed will not allow. The ruler of the Ottoman Empire was the Sultan. In America, it is the plutocrats. If other nations become more democratic by, say, distributing their wealth, and the U.S. doesn't, we will fall behind, much like the Ottomans did. Why Protestantism took hold. The Catholic Church had for centuries dominated Europe. While European kings would have greatly wanted the Pope off their backs, they were afraid by questioning the authority of the Pope, they would inspire their own subjects to question their authority. And they were right, hence the Enlightenment and the democratic revolutions that took place. However, in Germany, the emperor did not have as much control over his subjects anyhow, and as a result, Martin Luther gained the protection of some powerful princes. As a result, he was able to spread his message without being burned to death, much like how Muhammad had the protection of his uncle, and therefore his movement was able to grow. Central to Protestantism's allure to the poor was that the Catholic Church had been offering salvation for a price, and in effect what this meant was that the rich were able to get into heaven more easily. With both the powerful and the impoverished finding something to like about Protestantism, it eventually spread like wildfire. How the European empires of the 19th century ended. Well, this one's easy. After World War I and II, Europe was devastated and couldn't continue to suppress the 30% of the world anymore. The constant fighting among Europeans that had brought about Europe's supremacy over the world had brought it to an end. In sum, Europe's hegemony only lasted 100 years, but it being so recent, its effects are still very apparent. Currently, the last bastion of Western dominance rests in the United States, who, through the CIA, conducts an insidious reign of terror. If military force is needed, it claims it is fighting for freedom. The United States is interesting in the history of empires because it cannot be open about its imperial ambitions. It must cloak it with pretty words. Instead of calling the United States an empire, we call it a superpower. Instead of territorial conquests, we have spheres of influence, military bases, and allies that are most of the time indistinguishable from vassals. For example, we give Saudi Arabia military weapons. Why are we giving military weapons to a brutal dictatorship? Why do we support Israel when it abuses people in the West Bank? Why do we support South Vietnam when it was every bit as much of a dictatorship as the North? Why did we invade Iraq among countless dictatorships we could have invaded, among the ones we could have stopped supporting? Why didn't we oppose apartheid in South Africa? The simple answer is that America isn't about freedom, it's about power. America is an empire. Now that we've diagnosed it as such, the question becomes, how will it end? America, thankfully, will not end violently. Unlike the Gracchus brothers, our spokespeople for democracy were not, at least initially, brutally murdered. There is a strong tradition of fighting against wrong in the United States. We have many successful social movements that brought freedom to our nation. This is how our empire will end, through an uprising. The powers that be, which terrorize the globe, will be brought to heel, as they were in the past.